Hello and welcome everyone. This is Dr. Singh. Today we will aim to understand the fundamentals of the endocrine system, and in doing so, we will discuss the major glands that are part of the system, which will be releasing hormones onto specific target cells to cause their effect. The release of these hormones is dictated by feedback loops, which we will also discuss. By the end, we should be able to explain how the endocrine signals maintain homeostasis within the human body. The endocrine system can be simply summarized with a statement that it uses hormones to coordinate body functions over minutes, hours, days, or longer. Essentially, it's helping us to maintain long-term homeostasis, in contrast to the nervous system, which is involved in short-term homeostasis. The long-term homeostasis for the endocrine system essentially plays out as follows. There's these endocrine glands that will be releasing hormones into the blood, which will travel throughout the body. Now, only certain target cells that have a matching receptor for these particular hormones will respond. Most of the endocrine control is taking place with the use of these feedback loops, which we will discuss. So think essentially of the endocrine signaling as a broadcast messages that only certain cells are equipped to read. Hormone signaling within the endocrine system does follow a very simple pattern, and it happens as follows. It all begins with a stimulus that will change an internal condition from that of a normal to abnormal state. This abnormal state is picked up by an endocrine gland, which will then start to release a hormone. The hormone will then be carried in the blood around the body and will then go hit these specific target cells with correct receptors and respond to it. The response then allows us to restore balance from an abnormal transitioning back into a normal state for that particular area of the body. The hormone chemistry drastically affects how the signals are propagated within the endocrine system. In very broad general sense, endocrine hormones are categorized as either water-soluble or lipid-soluble. For the water-soluble hormones, such as peptides and catecholamines, they work by binding to and on the cell surface. Then they trigger second messengers on the inside, which will then cause the effect on that particular cell. Usually we find that the water-soluble hormones often are faster, but have shorter effects on the cell. For the lipid-soluble hormones, such as steroids and thyroids, they actually will cross the cell membrane. They will actually cross through the cell membrane and will bind to receptors on the inside, and then will change the gene expression. Sure, you're thinking transcription translation. Well, this will then lead to the end result within that cell. So depending upon whether it is water-soluble versus lipid-soluble, we have different mechanisms that will allow a hormone to carry out its effect on a particular cell. Is there a way to make sure that we don't over-release hormones in the body and to keep it within the normal range? Of course there is. And it's done so with the aid of these feedback loops. And one of them is the negative feedback loop. As the variable moves away from its set point, it'll cause a gland to release a hormone. This hormone will go hit a target tissue, which will then create a corrective response in the body. As the balance returns, the hormone release is decreased, and this is all due to this feedback loop that is there and apparent and functioning within this endocrine system to make sure that we don't oversecrete something that is of no value to us. Now, is there a control center for the endocrine system that allows it to work efficiently and effectively? Indeed, there is, and there's two parts to this control hub. They are the hypothalamus, which is colored in green for us over here, as well as the pituitary. The pituitary and the hypothalamus are connected together in this axis called the hypothalamus pituitary axis. The pituitary gland is subdivided into anterior and posterior part in very general terms. The hypothalamus, which we said was colored in green, is a structure that allows us to be able to link the nervous system and the endocrine systems together. When it is activated, it will release hormones that will control the anterior pituitary. So it will throw out these tropic hormones. Tropic hormones are hormones that are gland targeting hormones that will cause and stimulate and activate these various glands throughout the body. For example, the thyroid, the adrenal glands, or the testes or the ovaries, and cause them to release compounds into the body to cause the effect. The hypothalamus also connects to the posterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary is mainly involved in releasing ADH and oxytocin. ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone. Both of these are actually made up in the hypothalamus over here, but they are released from the posterior pituitary. Now let's take a moment to discuss some of the major glands that are part of the endocrine system. We'll begin with the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland, as you can see, is depicted right over here, and its main job is to release T3 and T4, which helps us to establish metabolic rate within the human body. On the backside of this thyroid gland, we have the parathyroid. The word para means around, so it's on the round on the backside of the thyroid gland. We would notice the parathyroid glands, and their job is to release PTH, which is parathyroid hormone, which allows us to raise blood calcium levels. We also have the adrenal glands on top, sitting on top of the kidneys. The adrenal glands and the cortex is the outer part over here. It's involved in releasing cortisol, aldosterone, and androgens, while as the middle part, called the medulla, is involved in releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. The big idea here is that these glands adjust the whole body setting as the anterior pituitary goes and talks to these major glands that are part of the endocrine system. The thyroid, for example, tunes the metabolism. The adrenals help the body respond to stress and maintain fluid balance demands within the body. Now let's take a moment to discuss pancreas, which is also part of the endocrine system. Pancreas is instrumental in allowing us to regulate blood glucose. Pancreas has got these little islands called pancreatic islets that have these particular cells that allow us to modulate blood glucose levels. It's got beta cells. Beta cells release insulin, especially when the blood glucose is high, to allow us to bring it back down to the normal. It's also got alpha cells, which release glucagon when the blood glucose goes low to allow us to bring it back up to where it should be. So insulin usually lowers blood glucose when it is high, and glucagon raises blood glucose when it is low. The liver, muscle, and the fat are the key target tissues for the pancreas to allow it to be able to help us to do that. As you can see in this depiction. The goal here is basically very simple, is to keep the glucose available without letting it drift too high. Now let us transition to talk about the main gonads for both male and female. In the female, the ovaries are involved in producing estrogen and progesterone, which helps us to regulate cycles, support pregnancy, and bone health. In the male, the testes are involved in secreting testosterone, which supports sperm production as well as offers secondary sex characteristics, especially during puberty. Now, what controls the secretion of these various hormones from these both ovaries and the testes? Well, it's going to be the pituitary, especially the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary releases FSH and LH, which then acts upon both the testes and the ovaries and regulates gametes and sex hormone secretions. Now, let's wrap things up by reiterating to ourselves 5 main things we should know about the endocrine system and its functionality. First, we should appreciate that the hormones are the main chemical messengers that are utilized. These hormones are going to be distributed throughout the body with the aid of the circulation of the blood. The blood will send these off to various parts of the body and to various cells, but only those cells that have the right receptor will respond. So the cells with the right receptor have the ability to respond, whereas other cells will not be responding to these circulating hormones. These hormones are usually categorized in one of two ways, either as being water soluble or lipid soluble. And they signal differently because water soluble will latch onto the outside of the cell membrane and cause a cascade of events on the inside, whereas lipid soluble actually will squeeze through the membrane and go to the interior and cause their effects. Now, all of this is controlled by a feedback loop, and the predominant one that plays out in the endocrine system is the negative feedback, which allows us to maintain homeostasis and to ensure that we only secrete the amount of hormone that is necessary to cause us to go back to the normal state. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this short clip of some benefit to you.